Welcome to Whispers of Chains. Here we tell stories history tried to silence, stories of lives lived under cruelty and the quiet courage that endured within it. Whispers of Chains explores power, not as it was claimed, but as it was challenged. In patience, in choice, and sometimes in love that dared to exist where it was forbidden. Tonight's story unfolds on a southern plantation where arrogance mistook itself for authority and two people discovered that intimacy, when freely chosen, could become the most dangerous rebellion of all. Listen closely. Some rebellions do not shout. They whisper and change everything. The night the master lost his gamble was a night that would mark everyone in that house forever. Cards lay scattered across the polished mahogany table, some face up, some overturned, as if even they wanted to hide from what had just happened. Gold and silver coins glittered faintly in the candlelight, their soft clink still echoing in the air like the final ticks of a doomed clock. A glass of wine had tipped and shattered, its dark contents creeping across the floorboards in a slow, sticky rivulet that stained the wood like a fresh wound. The master laughed, loud, careless, and drunk. It was the kind of laughter that filled a room but carried no joy. It bounced off the walls of the estate, walls that had witnessed decades of whispered deals, silent suffering, and power exercised without consequence. To him, this was just another game. Another night. He leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused, mouth curled in smug satisfaction despite his loss. Then his gaze drifted to Clara. Clara, standing near the edge of the room, felt the weight of that look settle on her like a hand around her throat. She had been treated like property for so long that part of her feared she had stopped being seen as human at all. Still, nothing could have prepared her for what came next. In a voice thick with wine and arrogance, the master gestured lazily toward her and said the words that would split the night in two. "She's yours, if you can claim her." The room went silent. Even the candles seemed to hesitate, their flames flickering nervously as if unsure whether to stay lit. A few men exchanged uneasy glances. No one laughed this time. Elias froze in the shadowed hallway. He hadn't meant to linger. There. He had been passing through, keeping his head low as he always did. Freedom was still new to him, fragile, uncertain. Only a month had passed since the papers were signed, since the chains had been removed, yet the habits of survival clung to him like a second skin. The words hit him like a blow. Candlelight spilled into the corridor, throwing jagged shadows across the walls, shadows that stretched and twisted like restless spirits. His heart thundered in his chest, each beat loud enough that he was certain someone must hear it. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to disappear back into the safety of anonymity. And yet his feet would not move. Anger surged first, hot and uncontrollable. Then something more dangerous followed, a reckless thrill, sharp and electric. Desire tangled with defiance, and beneath it all lay a deeper pool he couldn't name. Though he was free, the invisible chains of the plantation tightened around him once more, not iron, but circumstance, secrecy, and longing. Clara stood frozen, her body rigid as if carved from stone. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, her eyes wide with shock. But if anyone had looked closer, if anyone in that room had truly seen her, they would have noticed something else burning beneath the fear. A spark, intelligence, defiance, a silent refusal to be reduced to a prize on a table. Her husband, drunk on power and pride, noticed none of it. He didn't see the way her fingers trembled at her side, or how she drew in a sharp breath to steady herself. He didn't hear the storm raging behind her eyes. Elias stepped closer. The sound of his foot against the floor was barely audible, yet it felt deafening to him. Every step carried weight. Every heartbeat felt like a risk. The air between them seemed charged, thick with something unspoken. Their eyes met. For just a moment the world narrowed to that single glance. Clara saw him, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as a man standing at the edge of a choice. Elias saw her not as property, not as a possession being traded, but as someone awake, aware, and dangerously alive. Behind the closed doors of polished wood, where candlelight painted the floor in warm gold, something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but power, once so carefully arranged, had begun to crack. In its place stirred something transformative, dangerous, seductive, and impossible to control. Some nights passed quietly into memory, others carved themselves into the soul. This was one of them. By morning nothing would be the same, not fear, not desire, not love, and certainly not the master's carefully constructed illusion of control. The plantation stretched across the southern landscape like a small sun-baked kingdom, vast, orderly, and unforgiving. From dawn until dusk, cotton fields shimmered under the relentless sun, their pale blooms stretching to the horizon like a cruel imitation of snow. Rows upon rows of laborers bent beneath the heat, backs curved, fingers raw and scarred from endless work. Sweat soaked into fabric and skin alike, blurring the line between body and burden. The air itself felt heavy. It carried the scent of churned earth, salt from tired bodies, and wood smoke drifting from distant fires. It was a smell that clung to everything: clothes, hair, lungs. Even when night finally fell and the heat loosened its grip, the scent remained. A quiet reminder that labor never truly ended here. At the heart of it all stood the grand house. Its white columns gleamed in the sunlight, tall and proud, rising above the fields like a monument to order and control. The wide veranda stretched across the front, offering shade and vantage, a place from which the masters could observe their domain without ever touching it. From there, the world below looked smaller, manageable, owned. Inside, the house told a different story, one of refinement carefully layered over cruelty. Polished floors reflected candlelight like still water, mirroring silk dresses, tailored coats and practiced smiles. The air carried perfume and the deep, comforting musk of polished wood, an illusion of elegance meant to mask the truth beneath it. Every room was a stage. Conversations were measured. Laughter was timed. Even silence had meaning. Guests performed civility while hiding ambition, resentment, and hunger behind raised glasses and charming words. Servants moved quietly through it all, eyes lowered, footsteps soft, memorizing every rule without ever being allowed to forget their place. Survival here required more than obedience. It demanded subtlety. A letter folded into the lining of a coat. A message passed through a glance that lingered half a second too long, fingers brushing in a corridor where no one was supposed to look. These moments were small, fleeting, but they carried enormous weight. Each one was an act of defiance, a quiet declaration of humanity in a system designed to erase it. Danger made them intoxicating. Among the masters, cruelty often wore charm like a well-fitted suit. A smile could conceal menace. A joke could humiliate, without leaving a mark. Wine loosened tongues and revealed arrogance, while manners kept violence respectable. Power thrived not just in punishment, but in pretense, and yet desire survived. It slipped through cracks in the structure, uninvited and unstoppable. A lingering touch while passing a tray, a glance held just long enough to acknowledge what could never be spoken. A whispered word behind a closed door, soft enough to deny, powerful enough to change everything. These moments were dangerous, not because they were forbidden, but because they reminded people of who they truly were. It was within this charged world, balanced between order and chaos, fear and longing, that Elias's and Clara's story truly begins. A world where chains were real, heavy, and unyielding, but hearts remained wild. A world where courage did not roar, but whispered, where fear could be transformed into something almost beautiful, and where love, quiet, defiant, and impossible, could become a weapon sharper than any sword. It began that very night. Elias had crept silently through the darkened hallway, candlelight flickering across his tense features. Clara's door was ajar. From the shadows, he saw her, standing in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She was alone, finally, and the tension in the room was electric. Their eyes met. Desire and fear mingled instantly. Elias stepped forward, and she did not retreat. She was beautiful in the dim light, a mixture of strength and vulnerability, and he could see the silent storm of emotions crossing her face. He crossed the room slowly, every movement deliberate. She inhaled sharply as his hand brushed against hers, not fully touching but close enough to set hearts racing. Her pulse quickened, and he felt it beneath his fingertips. Their proximity was a question, an invitation, a test. "Are you afraid?" Elias whispered. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "I'm alive," she murmured, "and I want to feel it." Her hand hovered near his chest. When it touched him, even briefly, the electricity between them ignited. He leaned closer, and their lips nearly met, longing, hesitation, and desire tangled in the air. He pulled back just enough to let the tension linger, letting her anticipation burn, letting the forbidden thrill take hold. This was not a simple flirtation. It was strategy and seduction intertwined. Every brush of fingers, every near touch. Of lips, every whispered word became a weapon in their silent rebellion against the master, and yet it was intoxicating in a way that neither could resist. That night, they did not fully surrender to desire, but the spark had been struck, a spark that would burn brighter with each passing day. The days after the master's reckless gamble were heavy with tension. The air inside the grand house seemed to hum with danger, each servant cautious, each glance measured. Yet for Elias, every shadowed corridor and quiet corner was an opportunity to observe Clara, to learn her rhythm, and to plan both rebellion and connection. Clara moved through the house with a careful elegance, even when forced to serve her husband, with a smile. Her eyes carried an intelligence that pierced beyond appearances. Elias watched her from a distance at first, noting the subtle movements, the way she leaned slightly when speaking, the quick inhale she tried to hide when reprimanded, the way her fingers traced the edge of a table when lost in thought. Their first private conversation was almost accidental. Elias was carrying a tray of tea through the servants' hall, careful not to spill a drop. Clara, intent on her own task, nearly collided with him. Their hands brushed again, and this time neither withdrew immediately. There was a spark, palpable and undeniable. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and in that gaze was a mixture of curiosity, defiance, and something unspoken. "Careful," Elias murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper, carrying more meaning than the words themselves. Clara's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "I think I can manage," she replied, her voice steady, but a subtle tremor ran through her fingers as they lingered on his. From that moment, their secret meetings became intentional. Beneath the shadow of the stables at night, among crates and hay, they exchanged whispered words. The stables smelled of dry straw, horse sweat, and dust, but to them it became a sanctuary, a place where danger and desire intertwined. This night was different. The moon cast a silver glow through the small window of the stables, illuminating Clara's face, her hair shimmering like liquid light. Elias approached slowly, careful not to break the delicate tension. He reached for her hand, holding it for a long moment. The warmth of her palm against his sent shivers through both of them. Their eyes met, unspoken words passing between them. Trust, longing, anticipation. Clara's fingers slid slowly along the back of his hand, teasing, exploring. Every brush of skin against skin was electric, each subtle movement loaded with intention. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek, a whisper of desire escaping her lips. "I want to feel you." Even just for a moment. Elias's heart thumped, caught between desire and caution. He tilted his head, their lips almost touching, just inches apart. The smell of hay, sweat, and her own subtle perfume mingled, intoxicating him. Their bodies pressed slightly closer. Her hand trailed up his arm, fingers brushing the sensitive skin beneath his sleeve. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, letting him feel the quickening of her heartbeat. Every movement was deliberate, teasing, a slow dance of control and surrender. "Do you want this?" he whispered, his voice rough with longing. Clara nodded subtly, eyes half-lidded, lips parted. "Yes, but only if we are careful," she breathed. They lingered in that tension for what felt like hours. Every brush of her fingers, every near kiss, every shared breath became a game of seduction. Elias could feel her shivers against him, the warmth of her body, the slow rhythm of her breathing mingling with his own, and yet neither rushed. This was a night of anticipation, of exploration, of trust, building through intimacy. Every subtle touch, every shared breath, every teasing glance laid the foundation for a deeper passion yet to come. By the time they parted, their connection had deepened, hearts and minds intertwined. The fire had been lit, and though unconsummated, the tension was unbearable, a promise of more to come. After that night, Elias and Clara's meetings became more frequent, but never careless. Every glance and touch was part of a larger plan. They observed the master's moods, tested the loyalty of the staff, and learned the weaknesses of his friends. Even their seduction became a tool. Each intimate moment allowed them to read each other's desires and fears, to communicate silently, and to strengthen the bond that would one day serve as the key to their triumph. Their conversations, though quiet, were sharp and deliberate. Clara would press her hand to Elias's, whispering plans while their bodies stayed just close enough to feel warmth. "If we plan this right," she said softly, "we can outsmart him without spilling a drop of blood." Elias would nod, feeling the pressure of her fingers, the weight of her gaze, and the unspoken promise that every touch was more than desire. It was strategy, preparation, and trust. Even in these moments of tactical planning, their desire simmered beneath the surface. Every brush of skin, every close whisper, every shared glance carried the thrill of danger, the intoxication of proximity, and the growing anticipation of the night when all restraint would be broken. Weeks passed since their first stolen touch. Every glance, every brush of hands, every whispered word had built a tension that neither Elias nor Clara could ignore. The stables, once a sanctuary of quiet anticipation, now felt small, insufficient. For the fire simmering between them, the plantation itself seemed alive with danger. Overseers patrolled with sharp eyes, the master's arrogance growing each night. Yet the more he focused on gambling, wine, and pride, the more openings appeared for Elias and Clara to move unnoticed. Every shadow became their ally, every quiet corner a potential hiding place for stolen moments. Clara's defiance had grown too. She moved through the house with a quiet confidence that surprised even Elias. In her eyes was no longer just fear or longing. There was a spark of strategy, courage, and daring. She had begun to challenge him subtly, testing boundaries and creating opportunities for them to meet. It was during one of these late-night encounters, hidden in the servants' hall, that the next chapter of their intimacy began. The hall was empty. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Clara stood near the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Elias approached slowly, aware that every step carried danger and anticipation. Clara's eyes locked on his, a mixture of longing, defiance, and vulnerability. She stepped forward, letting her fingers brush his chest, tracing the line of his coat as though memorizing it. "I can't stop thinking about you," she whispered, her lips so close to his ear that her breath sent shivers down his spine. Elias reached for her, their bodies aligning in a way that had not happened before. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheeks. She leaned into the touch, pressing herself against him briefly, letting the warmth of their bodies mingle. Their lips met, not a tentative brush this time, but a slow, consuming kiss. Tongues teased, lips parted and pressed together, a dance of dominance and surrender, desire and control. Every breath, every sigh, every tremor spoke of longing held too long, of passion restrained by fear, but unleashed in secret. Clara's hands slid along his shoulders, down his chest, exploring, teasing. Elias responded in kind, careful yet deliberate, his own hands tracing her curves beneath the fabric of her gown, feeling the heat of her skin through layers of clothing. They paused, foreheads touching, breathing mingled, hearts pounding in synchrony. "We shouldn't," Elias whispered, but his hands lingered, unwilling to let go. "I know," Clara replied, voice trembling, "but I need this." Even for a moment, their bodies moved together, tentative, yet charged. Every brush of her, hands against him, every press of their bodies was a bold statement of trust and desire. They were no longer just hiding. They were claiming each other in secret, testing boundaries while navigating danger. For that night, the world outside the hall ceased to exist. every whispered moan, every sigh of longing, every heartbeat shared. In silence reinforced their connection. This was no longer playful teasing. It was intimacy that intertwined strategy, emotion, and unspoken love, setting the stage for what would come next. When they finally parted, breathless, Elias pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Soon," he murmured. "Soon we'll be free, and nothing will hold us back." Clara nodded, her eyes alight with both desire and determination. The spark had ignited fully now. It would not be extinguished. Their seduction was no longer just a secret pleasure. It had become a tool. Every touch, every kiss, every stolen moment reinforced the bond that would be their greatest strength against the master. They observed the master's movements, the patterns of his friends, the habits of the staff. Each detail became a thread in the tapestry of their rebellion. Clara used her charm, her seductive glances and subtle defiance to create distractions, while Elias gathered information, planned steps, and tested loyalties. Even in these dangerous aims, their intimacy deepened. Each night, every secret meeting became more daring, lingering touches, whispered promises, fleeting kisses, and the thrill of being discovered. The tension between desire and caution made every encounter more intoxicating, more urgent. Their connection became both strategy and passion. Every stolen glance across the dining hall, every touch of her hand in passing, every whispered word behind closed doors reinforced their alliance. Desire had become a weapon, intimacy a tool, and trust a shield. The master remained oblivious, drunk on pride and arrogance, unaware that his own household was quietly slipping from his control. Every misstep he took, every boastful laugh he released became an opening. Clara and Elias knew it would take time, patience, and courage, but the fire they had ignited in each other could not be contained. The seduction, the desire, and the shared rebellion had fused into a force that would ultimately unseat him. By the time autumn crept into the air, the plantation had begun to change, quietly, subtly. The master no longer noticed it, too consumed by his pride, his drink, and his belief that everything he owned remained firmly under his control. But Elias and Clara noticed every shift. Their plan had reached its most dangerous stage. Letters had been copied, ledgers quietly removed and replaced. Allies among the servants had been carefully chosen, not with words, but with trust earned. Over time, the master's reputation, once untouchable, was now fragile, held together by secrecy alone. And beneath it all, the tension between Elias and Clara had reached a breaking point. Desire no longer simmered. It demanded release. They had restrained themselves for weeks, knowing the cost of carelessness. But on this night, the weight of everything, fear, rebellion, longing, hope, pressed down on them all at once. The room was small, hidden above the storage wing, rarely used and forgotten by most of the household. A single lantern cast a warm, amber glow across the walls. Rain tapped softly against the window, sealing them off from the rest of the world. Clara stood near the window, her back turned, shoulders rising and falling with a slow, steady breath. Elias closed the door behind him quietly. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence itself felt intimate, heavy with meaning. When Clara turned, her eyes were filled with certainty, no hesitation, no fear, only resolve and desire. "If tonight is the beginning of the end," she said softly, "then I don't want to carry this longing any longer." Elias stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. She didn't. Instead, she reached for him first, her hands resting against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. Their kiss was unhurried, deep and intentional, no longer testing, no longer teasing. It was acclaiming, not rushed, not desperate, but full of trust built over months of shared danger. Elias's hands rested at her waist, steady and reverent, as if memorizing the moment. Clara leaned into him, her forehead resting against his, their breaths mingling. There was no struggle for control this time, only mutual surrender. She guided his hands, silently, telling him what she wanted, what she was ready for. Their movements were slow, deliberate, intimate, each touch a promise, each breath an affirmation. Outside, the storm continued, thunder rolling low in the distance. Inside, time seemed to stretch. They moved together not with urgency, but with intention, discovering, not consuming. This was not rebellion fueled by lust, it was love shaped by survival. When they finally rested together, wrapped in shared warmth and silence, there was no guilt, only clarity. Whatever came next, they would face it united. Clara's fingers traced slow patterns against Elias's hand. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "this was real." Elias nodded. "And it's only the beginning." From that night forward, everything changed. The intimacy they shared strengthened their resolve rather than distracting it. Where, once desire had been a risk, now it became grounding, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Clara moved through the house with renewed confidence. The master noticed the change but misread it as obedience, as submission. He never suspected that the very woman he believed he owned had already stepped beyond his reach. Elias became bolder too, but never careless. He spoke less, observed more. Each movement was precise. Every ally was prepared. The evidence they had gathered was now safely hidden, ready to be revealed at the right moment. Their interactions in public were restrained, almost distant. But in passing, a glance lingered, a hand brushed, a shared breath carried meaning only they understood. The plantation itself seemed to sense the coming shift. Whispers moved faster. The servants watched more closely. Even the overseers grew uneasy, sensing that something fundamental was slipping from their grasp. The master, however, remained blind. He laughed louder, drank more, and boasted endlessly, never realizing that his greatest mistake had already been made the night he treated a human life like a wager. As dawn broke the next morning, Clara stood on the veranda, the fields glowing. Faintly in the early light, Elias joined her quietly. They did not touch, did not speak. They didn't need to. Everything had been set in motion. The seduction had deepened into unity. The rebellion had found its heart. And the reckoning was no longer a question of if only when. The night the master believed he would celebrate his winnings was the same night everything collapsed. The parlor was alive again with noise, cards snapping against the table, glasses clinking, laughter swelling too loudly to be sincere. The master sat at the center, red-faced and triumphant, basking in the attention of men who fed his arrogance. He drank deeply, boasting loudly, blind to the silence spreading elsewhere in the house. Behind that noise, the household moved with purpose. Servants passed one another with deliberate calm. Doors that were usually locked stood briefly open. Papers changed hands. Keys were borrowed and returned. Nothing looked unusual, but everything was different. Clara moved through the house like a woman reborn. Her posture was straight, her expression composed. The fear that once followed her steps was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous to the master: certainty. Elias watched from the shadows, steady and alert. Every detail had been planned, every risk weighed. There would be no chaos, only exposure. The moment came when Clara was summoned. The master, drunk and careless, called for her as if calling for wine. The room fell quiet as she entered. Every man there watched with expectation, some with curiosity, others with pity. But Clara did not lower her gaze. She stopped at the center of the room, candlelight catching her face, illuminating not submission, but control. Elias stepped forward from the shadows behind her. The master laughed at first. "What's this?" he slurred. Clara spoke before Elias could. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. She placed a bundle of papers on the table: ledgers, letters, signatures, debts. Proof of crimes hidden behind charm and wealth. The laughter died instantly, the master's face drained of color. At that moment, Clara reached back, not in fear but in choice, and took Elias's hand. It was a simple gesture, quiet, intimate, devastating, not seduction of the body but of power itself. Their fingers intertwined slowly, deliberately in full view of the room. No secrecy, no shame. "Only truth," the master shouted, threatened, tried to rise, but the men around him did not move. Some already knew. Others had seen enough. For the first time, Clara was not an object being wagered. She was the one who had won. By morning, the plantation was no longer his. Authorities arrived quietly, summoned with evidence that could not be denied. Debts were called in. Allies vanished. The master was led away, not in chains of iron but in disgrace, stripped of the power he believed untouchable. The house felt different without him. Lighter, servants stood taller, whispers turned into calm conversation. Fear loosened its grip. Clara watched from the veranda as the carriage disappeared down the road. There was no smile on her face, only relief. Elias stood beside her, close but not possessive. Days passed. The plantation was reorganized, wages discussed, contracts signed. Some left, others stayed. For the first time, choice existed. Clara no longer lived in rooms that felt like cages. She moved freely, learning who she was without fear dictating her every breath. Elias prepared to leave. Freedom still mattered to him, and he had never intended to trade one form of captivity for another. On the final evening, they met where it had all begun, near the stables beneath an open sky. The night air was cool, quiet, honest. Clara stepped close to Elias. No shadows now, no need for secrecy. She touched his chest gently, not with urgency, but with intention. This time, she said softly, "I choose." Elias searched her face. "And you're free to walk away." She smiled. "So are you." They kissed, not like before. No danger, no rebellion. No hunger sharpened by fear, just connection. Their embrace was slow, grounding, filled with the understanding that love meant choice, not possession. They did not promise forever. They promised honesty. The master believed power meant ownership. He believed people could be traded like cards on a table, but power does not live in arrogance. It lives in patience, in courage, in the quiet strength to wait and strike with truth. Clara reclaimed her life. Elias reclaimed his freedom, and together, they proved that the most dangerous rebellion is not rage, but love chosen freely. This story reframes power by stripping it of spectacle. Rather than centering rebellion on violence or grand heroics, it insists that the most destabilizing force within an oppressive system is choice, quiet, deliberate, and shared. By placing intimacy, patience, and strategy at the heart of resistance, the narrative challenges the myth that domination is undone only through rage. Instead, it exposes how arrogance collapses under its own blindness, while those it dehumanizes endure, observe, and outgrow it. Clara's arc is not one of rescue but of reclamation. Her defiance is internal before it is visible. She does not trade one form of ownership for another. Elias's freedom is equally uncompromised. He refuses to let love become a substitute for chains. Their bond is powerful precisely because it is non-possessive. In a world built on ownership, they choose honesty over promises, connection over control. The master's downfall is intentionally unromantic. He is not overthrown by force, but by exposure. His belief that people can be wagered like cards is revealed as the ultimate weakness, a failure to understand that power rooted in contempt is fragile. What endures instead is solidarity, preparation, and moral clarity. Visually and thematically, the sepia-toned archival lens reinforces this message. History is not softened or aestheticized, it is confronted. The aged textures remind us that these systems were real, lived, and brutal, yet never total. Humanity persisted within the cracks. Ultimately, the story argues that rebellion does not always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits. And sometimes, the most dangerous act in an unjust world is to love freely, without fear, without ownership, and without asking permission.